Okay. We're in the fifth year, I believe, of the halachas of Pesach. We're in Siman Kuf Tes of Kitzur, and we're up to Sif Beis. Says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch like this. We mentioned yesterday, we started saying, again, scientifically, I don't know how this actually plays itself out, but we started to explain that there's machlekes of where the heat of the sun is concentrated. Either it's coming, either it's coming from below or it's coming from on top, and therefore we try to draw the water, and the water that was impacted by this heat will ferment or do the chimutz process much faster. So therefore, we try to draw the water specifically. It should be outside of the earth because in the earth also it could speed up the process. So we take it outside of the earth at least for 12 hours. We said at 12 hours or overnight or both of them. So that's fine. That's what we said then. Now, and this way it cools off. It has time to cool off. Now, continues the Kitzur, and he said like this: let's say you can't tell exactly when is Shkia, and therefore you're not sure when is this time, excuse me, a bin hashmashes. So what do? Yaktim tzas. Better to draw the water earlier. You shouldn't do it too early. Because let's say you end up drawing the water while it's still day outside, meaning the sun is out. Or even if it's at night, meaning the stars already came out, but it's still before chatzais. So in either of these two cases, mutter lalosh bem achar yud beishos, you could still use it after 12 hours pass. But let's say you draw the water after chatzos, in the middle of the night, then you should not use it the next day. You should wait until the next night passes over. So you do have two options here, which is number one, you do it even if it's during the day, if you don't have a choice, or you could do it also before chatzos at night, and as long as 12 hours pass, you could use it the next morning. Now, v'aminig, there's also another meaning, which is l'sanin es hamayim. We also strain the water. That means that we try to filter it. And we do this bebeged lavon v'naki. You do this with a white and clean cloth. And we keep it covered. Now, part of the reason why we keep it covered is because you never know what's going to fall in. And if things fall in, then they can ruin the water that you have and make it that it won't, that it'll, again, the same issue of speeding up the process, which is similar to the reason why we don't put in salt or things like that, because we're afraid it might speed up the process, which obviously. Okay, so if that's going to be the situation, then you have those options. And you should cover it over, like we mentioned, to keep it somewhat safe, sterile, I guess you could say. In addition to that, you should put it in a cold place, because again, we don't want it to get warm. Now, what does it mean, a cold place? So either bachutz, the Alter Rebbe says, either outside if it's cold, ve'im cham bachutz, and let's say it's hot outside. If you go to certain, like today, it was already warm here. In New York, I believe it was already over 70, at least yesterday, I think people were writing, I don't know if it still is. But if it's hot outside, yanichim b'martet, and you should put it indoors, but in a cellar. In those days, the cellar would have been a cool place, or at least naturally cool. So that's where you should put it. And let's say you're carrying it into your house and it's still day outside. So in other words, the sun is still outside. So either it's the next day or you drew it earlier because you have no choice. You should be careful that the sun doesn't shine on these bottles of water. Even if it's a cloudy day, the Alter Rebbe says, you should still cover it with a handkerchief or whatever. So most people will end up drawing the water, like we said, at night or before Shkia. So by the time you bring it, it's dark outside. But let's say you're bringing it in while it's light outside, so then you have to cover it over to make sure that it doesn't become warm from the sun or whatever would happen. And that we don't want to happen. Okay, so that is Siv Beis. Siv Gimel. You don't have to only draw the per day, per session. You can also draw once for a few days. And if it's during the day, you should bring it into a house. In other words, it shouldn't be in the sun. And if it's at night, you bring it outside the house and you leave it in the outside. But let's say it's still warm outside. You put it in a cellar both by night and by day. Again, the idea is that it should be temperature controlled. That we don't put it in a fridge to cool off. It has to go through the 12-hour process of being outside of the ground. So there is something about that, whatever it means. But there is a mitzvah, and it's better that every single day should have its own drawing of water. It should be separate. It's an idea, you can guard it more. It's happening in smaller batches. They bring here that it doesn't say this in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, but he mentions it, so there's no reason, if you could, there's no reason why not to. I'm sure the bakeries, when people are not drawing their own water, they probably draw for a longer time at once because they don't want to get into too nitty gritty. But for those that do their own bakings at their families and whatever, they'll draw water for their own thing. There's also something that we don't use earthenware, old keli. Part of this we explain now why. Even if it's kosher for Pesach, so there's no issue with it that it's chametz, but nevertheless you still won't use it in that case. Now, unless it's coated or glazed, as it's called. If it's coated with a glass layer, so in this case it's more protected, so then it could work. Now, why don't you do this? The klicheres yashan she'enoi mitzupa enoi hidur mitzvah, because if you have a klicheres that is an older one, so in other words, it's not a new one. So enoi hidur mitzvah, it's not going to be a nice thing. Yeah, it's not going to be a nice thing to do. Why wouldn't it be a nice thing to do? So we had this before. If you remember when we spoke about by Chanukah, yeah, we also mentioned over there that klicheres, especially after you use it, it becomes it never goes back to the way it was, and therefore, if it never goes back to the way it was, it's really better not to use it. Over there, it was a menorah that you burnt once with it. But even so, any klicheres that's used once, it just changes, and therefore, if it's glazed, then maybe you'll be okay. But in the shani semitic, you shouldn't change. The minig nowadays is most people try to use either glass, plastic. There was a machlekes in the beginning if you could use plastic, if it was a problem or if it wasn't a problem. The Kitzur, people do use plastic as well, but for those that are baking their own, they usually try to have their little batches of glass ones, and that's what they use. So my family, we had glass. It was that you have these glass, big glass like bowl jars or whatever they call them, these big ones, and that's what they would use. Okay, Sivdal. So far so good. You have the streams, the rivers during the times of Nisan. He says, again, I don't know exactly how to translate this and what it means, but this is what they say. The rivers during the time of Nisan are generally colder than the wells. Now that might be because there's runoff from the mountains with the ice is melting, whatever the reason is that goes through the ground. The point is, he says that the streams will be colder. So in those countries, again, not all countries are like this. You have South America, it's possibly the opposite. But for the places where it's colder, you're coming out of winter, so it would be best to take the water from the river, if you could, now Alter Rebbe says, because it's colder. And again, cold is our friend. But sometimes the rivers, they instead of being their natural cold, they grew from the melted ice, the melted snow, which in this case it was melted. And if they're melted, then the water that's flowing through them is the part that's not cold, he says. And therefore, so then it would actually be better to do the opposite, to take from the wells. So again, you have to see what's happening. Sometimes the water could be much colder. Maybe it's coming from the ground, so it went through more of a process. I don't know what this means. So then you use it. But if it's coming from the melted snow, then it means that it's the melted water that's flowing through, which means that it's automatically going to be warmer and melted, which in that case, you should not use it. So again, you have to figure out whatever works better. Sif, hey. Ideally, you really shouldn't use, or at least, again, like the Alter Rebbe says, you shouldn't use a goy to draw the water. It should be a yid. And also, the Alter Rebbe adds, it also shouldn't be through people that are either mentally impaired or a katan or something like that. Better it should be through a gadol and someone who's mechuyev in all the mitzvahs. Why? Even though this is only what we call a hechsher mitzvah, you're just preparing for a mitzvah. You're not actually, this isn't part of the mitzvah, but even the hechsher mitzvah does have some kedusha to it, and therefore it should be done through these types of people. Now, everything else, like the kneading of the dough and all that stuff, that has to be from a yid, Yisrael, someone who's an adult. So that's obviously, they use at least they did till now, they used Russian ladies, but hopefully they were all yidden. That was the idea. And because it has to be bekavana. So they always say the shem matzah mitzvah, things like that. We'll get to, maybe we won't. Okay, Siv Vav. Siv Vav. La yitnin bekli You shouldn't use a keli that once stored honey or other types of juice. The Alter Rebbe says that we don't literally mean fruit juice. We mean any juice. Anything not water is included in this. So you should only use a keli that ever had water inside of it. Unless you do hagala. You kasher this keli first, so then you could use it even though it had at one point honeys or whatever. But the Alter Rebbe says it's best to be careful about this, but if you couldn't, then it would be okay. Now, the reason is because in Shulchan Aruch it mentions that when you have other liquids on their own, we know that other liquids do not cause chametz, right? In theory, if you made matzah out of apple juice, yeah, if it was pure 100% apple juice or whatever, it wouldn't become chametz. It's only water. But our concern is the opposite, that maybe the water, that a little bit of water gets mixed with the fruit juice, and then instead of it not becoming chametz at all, it actually does the opposite. It speeds up the chametz process. So again, we don't know, and that's why we don't want to use this. Now, so if you kasher it, but if you didn't, it looks like it would possibly still be okay. Now, for sure, you don't want to use it inside of a keli that at one point stored something sharp. I feel like a chametz even if it wasn't chametz. Because when you have something that's sharp, then it becomes chametz even faster. In that case, hagala won't even help. Hagala will work for the fruit juices, but hagala won't work for something that was sharp that was stored inside this thing. And this is lehuva b'shulchan aruch Rabbeinu. It doesn't mention this in Alter Rebbe, so maybe you could kasher it. I'm not sure. You also shouldn't use a copper keli. So don't. Some people say, "Oh, metal is maybe even better." Don't use a copper keli. Because it doesn't become as cold as other materials. So again, the best thing, and why is that? Because nechishis, copper by nature apparently is warm, whatever that means. So that's why we said glass is the best. Now again, Rabbeinu Kasser shelechatchila teivizarkin. Alter Rebbe says again that it's best to be concerned for that, meaning the b'diavad. Excuse me, it would still be okay. Fine. Siv ches. Siv zayin. Siv zayin. Let's say a person sees that they don't have enough mayim shalom. They drew the water, they didn't do enough. You could add in other water. Again, you're not being mevatel and isser. You're just using different water. So in that case, you could use regular water if you needed to mix it together. That can work. But the majority should be from the mayim shalom. Some people say you should not do this, but the Chura and the Alter Rebbe says it's better if you don't. But if someone does it, then don't. You don't have to go attack them. It could be okay. Now, the Kitzur says the best ratio would be that you should have 2/3 of mayim shalom, water that was drawn the night before. And again, the Huv B'Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu, also this is not mentioned in the Alter Rebbe, so l'chura we don't have that ratio. Now, v'yesh lahader im afshar lishav esamayim shemesifim mitoich mash'eva ishar be'er mechusa she'ein hashemesh ba alamayim. If you could, the best way to do this is at least to use, if you're going to end up adding water, it should come at least, and it's not going to be mayim shalom overnight. At least it should be from a source that never came in contact with the sun. If you could do that, that would be a close second as well. Siv ches, let's say you're doing it on Sunday, which is, let's say, for example, my family does it usually on Sunday. When I used to do it, when I lived in Crown Heights, they still do it. But see, so when do you do this? You can't draw the night before, because the night before is Motzei Shabbos, and you have to do it during Ben Hashmashos, which means it's still Shabbos. So then, so you do Thursday night. Shabbos, Friday night, you have Shilat Samtim and Hashmashos, you can't do it basically too early. Right, meaning you're going to do it before Shkia is going to be too early. And on Shabbos adds the Alter Rebbe, so you can't do anything because you're preparing for after. So therefore, in both cases, you won't be able to do it. Not Friday night and not Motzei Shabbos. So therefore, you do Thursday night. Now, and you have no other option, no other water. If you didn't do it, you should do it Friday after mincha. Or you could do it on Shabbos itself with a goy, because then, as we mentioned, that it would be shvus to shvus for a mitzvah, so you could do that. Now, that's what the Kitzur says. The Alter Rebbe says, Rabbeinu Kasaf sheim shachach v'niskar ben hashmashos. Let's say you forget and you remember Friday ben hashmashos. So Yishiv Ayidei Goy, you could use the Goy. I feel like even if you would have to carry it for you, because again, here you would have a shvus meaning asking the guy. And even though it's a Rishus Rabim, which is the Isser carrying the Araisa, but it's Ben Hashmashas, which is a suffix, and it's a Tzedek mitzvah. So in those cases, you would be able to do this. Now, Siftes continues the Kitzur, and he says, Ein lishpoich hasamayim b'nei hameis or b'nei hatkufa. There was a meaning like this, that there's two times a year, what's called the tkufa. Tkufa of the winter, tkufa of the summer, which means people call it equinox or whatever. Yeah. So that's when it transitions. I think there's four actually. There's four. There's I guess spring, whatever the nose. So the point is that there are certain things that happen when there's an equinox, according to halacha, whatever it means, I don't know. But apparently equinox means when it's a split between the two parts of the year. So the two main ones are basically when you have 12-hour days on both sides. 12-hour days, 12-hour nights, right? So it's exactly 12 hours. So there's two times a year. Once going into the winter, once going into the summer, right? Both times. So that day that it switches, yeah, it's called Kufis Nissen. That day that it switches, apparently, the moment of this equinox, there's some sort of dam or some sort of ruach that gets around, and it's not a good thing. So what the halacha says that if you have any water that's exposed during that time, you have to spill it out. You're not supposed to drink it. So what happens if you have mayim shalanu? Because this is a common thing. It's mayim shalanu that you're doing during that time. So the halacha is, ein lishbrichas hamayim ne'amesim ne'atkufa, you should not spill it out. Even though all the other water you will, because of some sort of tipas dam that comes, I don't know, ruchnias, whatever it is. But however, you shouldn't spill out the ones that you took for the matzah. Shenemar, why? Because it says, shemer mitzvah yeda davar. Anyone that does a mitzvah, we learn in Shlomo Melech says that if you're doing a mitzvah, nothing bad will happen to you. So therefore, you're doing a mitzvah with this water. But if it's u'b'mayim she'einam the matzah's mitzvah, the Alter Rebbe says if it's not for the matzah's mitzvah, you're just doing it for the rest of the matzah, then nachil l'shafchan, then it would be a good thing to spill it out. If you could find other ones, because again, the mitzvah would be for the first 2 nights of the seder. But after that, if you could hold it in, if you don't have to spill it out. So then if you could spill it out, then you should. But Mikal Makkah says the Kitzur, the Chatchila, what you should arrange originally. Kufa tipa, when you know that it's going to be the tkufa. Yaniach b'teicha mayim chatichas barzel, ktana unekia, kamay machat. You should put in a small little piece of barzel. You should put in a small little piece of barzel, not nechoshes, because we said before nechoshes warms it, yeah? So if you put in another type of metal, you put another type of metal, a small one, like a machat, a needle, or something like that, and somehow that protects. Again, how, I don't know, but this is what it says in Allah. Now, the best way to do this is to tie it with a string when you drop it into the water. You don't have to stick your hand inside and take it out later. Because if you do, that's a problem. You're going to put your hand in with whatever materials could be there, and that could ruin it for the water as well. So you hang it on a string and then you do it. And this way, you keep the water pure. You should just pull it out with the string later. Now, the Alter Rebbe says that what you should try to do is remove it as soon as you could, as soon as the tkufa passes. So don't leave the metal, the thing in there for too long. Now, this metal apparently will protect you, like we said, from this sakana of the tkufa. But at the same time, we don't want any material in the water that could change the status of the water and make it become much faster or something like this. In the Bavitch, what they would do is they would take the water, like we mentioned, they would do the whole thing, and they would also dance after they got the Mayim Shalom. They did this by the Rebbe as well. I think the Rebbe Rashab would go, and therefore everyone would go with him. So it became a whole procession with all the Mashpiyim and all the Rabbanim, because the Rebbe Rashab would go. And the Rebbe Rashab, I think, would say, he looked at the some of the Bachman that were drawing the water. It says they would go into the river, and they would roll up their things, and he would have like a stick, and he would draw out some water. Either way, it says he saw the Yechidah Shabbat at some of the Bachman while they were doing the mitzvah. So apparently it's a big thing. And that's what they did. And the Rebbe used to go also outside 770. There was a whole thing. It used to be one place, then the other. Then they brought it closer, the well. Then they put a faucet there. So Kitzur, it's all part of the process of making matzah. Okay, from here we'll move on to I think more of the typical Pesach.